All right, algae control, or algae 101. The biggest question we get in ponding all the time is algae. It happens whenever you have water. So the most important thing to remember is algae is a plant. Just like anything else, it needs light, water, and food. Water we're pretty much stuck with because it's a pond. Light, there are a couple of ways to control light. You can use plants to cover surface area, which block the light from getting to it. You can also dye the water a blue if you want. That helps block some of the UV light from getting to the algae. Those are some simple ways to do it. Some people will put shades over their pond if you want to have some kind of structure like that. But the way that we can do the most good controlling algae is by dealing with its food source. The handout that you've got talks about the nitrogen cycle. In a pond, the natural process is fish will go to the bathroom, leaves will blow in, pollen will blow in, leaves will come off of your plants in the pond. All of that material, as it breaks down through natural processes, gives off ammonia. Ammonia, as it builds up for fish, is bad. So you don't want it to get too high, and that can cause fish death sometimes. The way we control ammonia is by adding in beneficial bacteria, and it comes in several different forms. There's a liquid that you can put in that gets distributed throughout your pond pretty rapidly. There's a powdered form that you sprinkle in and it falls down and will colonize on the rocks more quickly, so that it kind of turns the bottom of your pond into a filter. Because filtration in a pond has two parts. There's mechanical and biological. The biological part is the bacteria products. And by adding them in regularly, you're keeping the level of bacteria up really high so that it can break down as much of that ammonia as possible. So you're kind of getting in on the front end of the cycle and breaking it down. There are a couple of other products that you can use. The Maintain and the Clean are combination products that have algicide, dechlorinator, bacteria, all combined in one treatment, so you're not using multiple bottles to treat. The Maintain is your normal bacteria dose that you would use all the time if you start to get a buildup on the bottom of the pond. The Clean has a bacteria that I'll explain in a moment that works down in the muck that builds up on the bottom of ponds. Because leaves are always blowing in, dirt's blowing in, rain washes stuff in. The trick is to get it into balance by dealing with that material. So once you've got your bacteria established in the pond, that takes all of that ammonia, turns it into nitrites on your sheet there. The nitrites are also toxic to fish if they build up too far. As the process continues, the bacteria takes it from nitrites into nitrates. And nitrate is algae food or plant food. So the way you deal with that part of the cycle is by having plants in your pond. That's what makes the whole thing a water gardening and does the whole complete cycle. Because the plants, if you have, whether it's the floating ones or the shallow water marginal plants or lilies, all of those take up nitrates because that's what they feed on. So you're competing with the food for the algae. And if you have the right mix of plants, they will consume that stuff and algae just won't have anything to feed on and your water goes clear. So once they've taken care of that, the cycle begins again because their leaves will fall off and the whole thing starts again. But by continually adding the bacteria in, you're keeping ahead of the process. Now, the second part is there are two types of bacteria. The beneficial bacteria that are in these products work in water where there's air. It's an aerobic bacteria. down in that layer of sediment and gunk that builds up over time, there's not much air down in there because it goes kind of anaerobic. And the bacteria that's in the clean or in the sludge remover packs works where there's no oxygen. That bacteria actually takes it, breaks it all the way down to gases, so it never even gets to the nitrates. It's not a fast process, but if you get it established in the pond early on, as that stuff builds up, it gets taken out of the system. So that's how you interrupt the food cycle for algae, by using the beneficial bacteria, and that's the biological filter. For mechanical filtration, there are a couple of different things you could do as well. In our ponds around here, we've got a skimmer and a biofalls, which the skimmer is like on a pool. It has a flapper door and it pulls floating debris off the surface into a basket or a net. And you pull that out and dump it, and that way all that doesn't break down and you're getting that stuff completely out of the pond. It also protects your pump so nothing can clog it up. It pumps it from there around to the biofalls, which is a waterfall filter, and it's got usually a plastic bioball, which is surface area for your bacteria to grow on, so that you have a concentration of that in the water flow. But it also has pads which will collect debris, and you pull those pads out and clean those, and that gets more of it out of the system. So it's kind of a combination, biological and mechanical. You can also use things like a net to scoop stuff out that does start to collect on the bottom and just get it out of the pond. This particular one comes with fingers, so you can grab like the stringy stuff or scoop up algae or leaves and get them and then scoop them with the net. There are finer mesh nets if you're trying to get that really fine sediment. You can scoop it out. But it's all aimed at removing as much of the physical debris before it breaks down and starts the whole nitrate problem. And all of those things are aimed at, really, there's two different types of algae. There's the green water, the pea soup algae, which is a single cell algae that floats in the water. And by using these, you're controlling a lot of that. The other type of algae is string algae, and that's the stuff that attaches to the rocks and strings out into the water. It helps to control how much nitrates are available, but with products like that, or with algae like that, there are a couple things you can do to kind of mitigate it. The barley bales or the liquid barley extract, it puts off a natural hydrogen peroxide that inhibits string algae growth. So you can put that in, and it's kind of a long-term solution. As the straw breaks down, it gives that chemical off. As you pump this in, it's already down into that form. The other way to control string algae is by using a liquid algicide. Now the thing about algicides is when you kill algae with it, and it'll kill any algae that it comes in contact with, that dead algae is going to go right back into the cycle of breaking down and becoming food for more algae. So when you use the algicide, it works a whole lot better if you've got your biological filter running too, so that as you kill the algae, this breaks it down and moves it out of the system. So it's really about balance. You want to make sure that if you're going to have fish in a pond, you don't have too many, because if you overload it with fish, you're going to have more fish waste and debris from that kind of thing, which adds more into the biological load in the pond.
How many is too many?
How many is too many fish? The rule of thumb, if you have a regular pond, is 1 inch of fish for 10 gallons of water. If you have filtration set up, that's set up for your volume of water, you can go as much as 1 inch of fish for every 5 gallons. And when you calculate that inch, we usually say if you've got a koi and it's a small to medium pond, that koi is going to get maybe 12 inches long. So you want to account for what it's going to grow into. Whereas goldfish will go 6 to 8 inches. And that way you could figure out, if you've got 1,000 gallons, you could have 100 inches of fish in a regular pond. So that would be like 10 koi or something like that. So the more fish you put in there, the more fish you put in there, the more you want to make sure that you've got your bacteria in there right, so that it can compensate for that extra fish load. And then as far as plants go, the rule of thumb on that is you usually want about 60% of the surface covered to block UV light and to help control it. But then when it comes to plants, and there'll be another talk on that later, there are submerged plants, which are oxygenators, and they suck up a lot of the nitrates and then produce oxygen, which helps. There's also the marginal plants, which go in the shallow water around the edge. And they all kind of add into your plants, and they all pull up food in competition for the algae. The final thing I want to mention before I answer questions is the beneficial bacteria works best when there's a lot of aeration in the water. That can come from a good waterfall, it can come from fountains, or it can come from actually putting an aerator like you would in a fish tank or something that bubbles air up through the water. Anything that increases that amount of oxygen in the water is going to make that bacteria work better. And are there any questions? I know that's a lot of information about.
So it's either or, the beneficial bacteria or the herbicide or algicide?
They work better when you do them together. Yeah, because
one doesn't.
The algicide is going to kill algae, but that puts it right back into breaking down to become food for more algae.
Okay.
But if you have the bacteria, when you kill it, the bacteria breaks it down, and then your plants take up the nitrates in it, and your plants are doing good, and the algae's not.
So how often should you be treating with stuff?
When you start up a pond, they recommend 2 to 3 times a week for the first month, and then once you've got that population built up and your pond is clear, then you can go to once a week. There are also, I didn't bring one out, but there's an automatic dosing system if you want that you can put in next to the pond. It has bags of the combination product, and it puts in little amounts all the time, so that instead of treating it and having the level up high and it falls off over a week, it's just a straight level. That way you don't have as many dips in your treatment. And that's a way to keep you from having to do pumps every week too. You just put the bag in on a medium-sized pond, it'll last for a month. It's got a little canister you can bury in the ground, and then on the top it's got a control pad that lets you select your volume of water of your pond, and then some buttons to help prime it and let you know that it's still going. And then if you want, you can put a fake rock over it or put it next to plants to hide it. And then it has a little tube that just runs into the water.
But it doesn't need it. It's not like a circulation. You just pump stuff in.
Yeah, it just pumps stuff in.
Perfect.
Yeah, and it's got a little motor on the inside that just constantly goes to put that amount in.
And what's that thing called?
Automatic dosing system. You missed the first part where I
Yeah.
was talking about the nitrogen cycle, but it explains how the food gets into the water that the algae is feeding on. The food that you feed fish, the fish waste, dead plants, leaves that blow in, all of that stuff breaks down into ammonia, which is not good for fish. But the beneficial bacteria takes that ammonia, turns it into nitrites, and then nitrates. The nitrates is food for plants. It's the nitrogen, the first number you see when you have like a 10-10-10 or something. And the plants are what take up that nitrate to get it out of the system. You can do water changes to actually physically remove the water if it's high in nitrates, but when you do that, you're also removing some of your bacteria and things like that. But it can be done like that. We do it in our fish tanks and stuff. But in a pond, hopefully you can achieve a balance of filtration and plants to not have to, to get it to go clear.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm around. If you have any other questions, my name's Ed.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank